Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Good morning, Sharon Burke, Middleton Park Ward.
Just for people watching, there's a usual fire alarm test at 10:30, so maybe just give it another 5 seconds. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Councillor Jim McKenna, Army Ward. Glad to be back after missing the last one. Thank you.
Good morning, John Woolmer, Acting Chief Officer for Environmental Services.
Victoria Bradshaw, Chief Finance Officer for the Council. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Abigail Scott-Paul, Director of External Relations at Leeds 2023.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Thiare and I'm Creative Director and CEO of Leeds 2023. Lovely to see you all.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eve Roothouse and I'm the Chief Officer for Culture and Economy at Leeds City Council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor. I'm one of the Deputy Leaders and Executive Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Morning, Councillor Simon Seary, Pudsey Ward.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adelaide Wharfdale Ward.
Rob Clayton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor for the board.
Thank you. And we're just plugging in the last member.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Exec Board Member for Resources.
Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting. I'll pass over to Debbie for the first 5 items.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Agenda item 3, there are no late items. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests? I'll take silence as there are none. Thank you. And agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Flynn, and Councillor Anderson is actually his substitute today. We've also been told that Councillor Chapman will be attending, but she may be late. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to update, I've also received notice that Councillor Firth is intending to be here, but could be late. Well, it's clearly late as well. Okay, so if we move on to agenda item 6, I'll first take any matters of accuracy in the minutes. Can members indicate if they've got any issues? No. Okay, and then over to Rob for matters arising.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, minute 8 from the meeting on the 20th of September, we had colleagues from HR presenting on BAME staff network issues, and just to update the board that will be coming back to January following a discussion with the various staff networks. Minute 9, electoral services.
Can I just comment on that? We've invited a number of the networks to come and speak to us as a scrutiny board, and we could want to be inclusive on that. And so we could have a number, and we'd very much welcome them to come and tell us what they're doing and how they're helping us be more inclusive across the council, across the board. So I think that's a really positive step. So thank you, Rob.
Yes, thank you, Chair, indeed. And there'll be a number of those networks coming over for the remainder of the municipal year. Minute 9, which was electoral services who attended the meeting last time. I have circulated to board members additional information linked mainly to the election that took place in May 2021. If any members have any comments or concerns on that, then please do come back to me. At minute 10, this was on the service desk from colleagues in IDS, and that will be coming back in February, just for members' information, because that was quite a significant comment and debate, and I think members did want it to come back, so that's planned in. And then lastly, minute 11, the staff wellbeing surveys will also be presented to the November meeting as part of a wider report on the future working arrangements at the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. Are there any other matters arising that members want to raise? No. Okay, so we'll move on to item 7, which is the value of culture and creativity in the city. I'd just like to say I'm really excited about this item, but we're doing our first video in a presentation at this board, which I feel is appropriate given this is given the topic. I'd also like to personally welcome the Leeds 2023 team. Welcome to the board, and we look forward to hearing from you as well. Just so you know, you can assume we've read the papers, which we have, and feel free to highlight the key points that you want to make to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And I think Robert is going to share my slides first of all.
I am. Just bear with me one moment. Yeah.
So whilst Robert's getting my slides up, just to really say thank you to the board for the opportunity to set out the value of culture and creativity in Leeds' social and economic recovery from COVID-19. As the report includes a great deal of detail, I have prepared a few short slides to summarise the key content, and I couldn't resist including an image from Thursday and Friday last week in the city. You'll then hear from Cully about Leeds 2023, and we're really looking forward to then taking your questions. The long-held recognition of cultural value is the reason why Leeds City Council has preserved a really strong culture service and invests to support a vibrant creative sector for the benefit of the city. The report sets out the policy context within which our culture service delivers, provides an overview of the service before setting out the economic benefits of culture, including the potential role culture can play in supporting the recovery of our city and local centres. It then moves on to set out the background on Leeds 2023, our year of culture, and summarises the covenants, arrangements, financial commitments and progress towards the year. Could you move the slide on, please, Robert? It should be in the bottom left. Fantastic. So by way of context, our culture strategy was adopted by the council in July 2017, having been co-produced with the people of Leeds. My predecessor, Cleany McPherson, discussed with Scrutiny the delivery framework for the strategy, which remains a keen focus of our work. However, given the impacts of COVID-19, board members will note that we're currently consulting on the priority areas to ensure they're focused on the right things, given the period we've just lived through as a city. Our economic recovery framework was published in October 2020, and it outlines an approach to recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic that's centred around the need to respond, reset and renew, and build resilience, and all of that within the ambition to create a strong economy with a compassionate city. So the recovery framework particularly makes clear the importance that arts and culture has a huge role to play. Shall we move on, Robert? Thank you. Thank you. The slide's not, you can't see every word on the slide, but don't worry too much. What essentially I just wanted to summarise is the council culture service. And of course, the details are set out in the report. The 3 services that sit under the culture portfolio include arts events and venues, Leeds museums and galleries, and culture programmes. But other council networks and services are also really important for culture, including the Leeds Library Service and Leeds Music Service. It's our arts events and venues team that delivered Light Night at the back end of last week, along with major events through the year like Leeds Triathlon and other smaller events like the events that the Breeze team put on across Leeds parks in the summer. Our Leeds culture programmes include the responsibility for the delivery of the culture strategy and for maintaining the relationship with Leeds 2023. The Leeds Museums and Galleries team have just finalised their report for their performance in the last financial year, and Chair, I'll send that to you and to Robert afterwards for circulation. It has been highlighted in a recent communication to members, but to make sure this scrutiny board has particularly seen it. Thank you, Robert. So in the report, you'll also see there's a lot of detail about the benefits of culture. The benefits of culture, yes, are measured in terms of the impact on the economy, but also in terms of the impact on people and place. And helpful context for us is the DCMS work, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport work that was done in 2015. That included some really important findings about the impact of culture on people's health. So, for example, people that engage in culture are more likely to report good health and cost savings for the NHS of between £1.89 and £5.07, very specific, per year. But equally, and perhaps importantly, in the context of post-COVID-19, good health associated with culture reduces the use of mental health services, and with cost savings associated with that too. Further, participants in culture are more likely to go on to further education in later years, and engaging with culture can result in increased earnings. Can we move on? Thank you. Some more recent work as well, published at the end of 2020 by the UK Cultural Cities Inquiries, set out the importance of culture to stimulate the reanimation of places and boost the recovery of retail, tourism, hospitality in a post-COVID context. And this type of research is what is driving many cities right across the UK to see years of culture as a way to aid recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. There were more cities than ever before that bid for the UK City of Culture for 2025. And it was fantastic to see our sister city, Bradford, being shortlisted for that. Can we move on? Thanks. I know that members are particularly interested on how we can revive our high streets and our city centre post-COVID-19. And you may be aware that we did some research earlier this year that was the subject of a report to Executive Board around trends and opportunities for our city and local centres. And that research underlined how culture can play its part in bringing people together, in supporting and increasing footfall, evident again by our recent experience at the back end of last week. But this is right across our city as well, not just in the city centre. The Morley Town Deal includes a strong cultural aspect to it, as do other projects right across the city. So that's a summary of our service and the values. I just want to quickly make sure we're all grounded in relation to the background to Leeds 2023 before I hand over to Cully. Thanks. So some members in this room may, I wasn't here in March 2015, but I joined the council in summer of 2018. So members may recall this in better detail than myself. But back in 2015, there was an extensive citywide consultation which led to an agreement that we as a council would bid to become a European Capital of Culture. And the process then in 2016 was announced. In October 2017, the Executive Board adopted Leeds 2023 bid, but sadly, at the end of 2017, the European Commission cancelled the competition for UK bidding cities as a result of our decision to leave the European Union and the ongoing Brexit negotiations. But Leeds was down but not out. And some of you may have been at the legendary meeting that happened at Leeds Town Hall, where over 700 people attended and expressed their intention and desire for the city to host its own year of culture by 2023, which led to the decision in June 2018 to create the Leeds Culture Trust, which was then first registered in March 2017. An independent chair was appointed in 2018, and the trust was incorporated as charity in 2019. And I'm delighted that we now obviously have Cully sitting to my right, who is both creative director and chief exec of the Culture Trust. So before I pass to Cully, I just want to touch very briefly also on our financial and governance commitment to Leeds 2023 by way of context. Have we popped onto that one? Yeah, great. So at the time that the Culture Trust was created, we entered into a grant agreement with the Trust. And in that original grant agreement, our contribution was in the region of £12 million through quarterly instalments. In October of last year, we, as part of our financial savings, a proposal to reduce the remaining grant by 15% was proposed. This was consulted on and was agreed. And at the same time, we managed to secure some gain share allocation from West Yorkshire, which reduced our financial commitment in this financial year further. Our contribution to 2023 remains significant in the region of £8.8 million, and it will continue to be properly scrutinised through the revised grant agreement. Our 8.8 million goes towards the budget target of 32 million, which the Culture Trust is seeking to raise. This is commensurate with the actual spend in Hull for their year of culture and the budget for Coventry City of Culture. Although I should remind everybody that Leeds' population is much smaller than both Hull and Coventry. And the Culture Trust aims to invest around 50% in programme delivery.
You meant to say Leeds' population is much larger.
Yes, sorry, I got it the wrong way around. Monday morning, a slip of the tongue, apologies. So that is by way of context everything from me. And then I think it's much better for you to hear directly from Collie and the team about the progress that Leeds 2023 are making.
Eve, if you just turn off your speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eve. And we've also got some slides, Rob, so if you could kick off with that, and then I can meanwhile introduce myself a little bit. Thanks, Chair and panel, for inviting us to this opportunity. It's great to be here and tell you a little bit about where we're at. As I said earlier, I'm Councillor Firth, and I am Creative Director and CEO of Leeds 2023. And I suppose I wanted to kick off to say that in some ways, many of the values embedded in what we're about to show you come partly from a very personal place, because I'm someone who had little or no access to the arts myself, and the opportunity to run a festival of culture for the very city that gave me my first opportunity and opened the doors for me as a professional in the sector is a real privilege, and I'm very honoured and also very committed to bringing the best that we can to support others in the city to really enjoy and engage and participate with culture. So let me kick off with sharing our launch film that we made earlier in the year to kickstart as part of our brand and telling people what we're trying to do. And I hope it captures some of our approach to delivering an extraordinary year of culture. And we're delighted it's the first film to come to Scrutiny, so let's hope it works. Thank you.
For one whole year, all 365 days, 12 months and 500,000 minutes of it, this city is letting culture loose. We're gonna make, create, perform, run, bake, share, sing, speak, play and more besides. Because culture is everywhere in this city. There's poetry here, and our football team can be pretty poetic at times too. This is theatre, and so is this, and this. She's a performer, and him, and her, and he put in some serious performances. And this is art, and so is this. And look at that, that's definitely art too, right? So now is the time to shout about creativity in all its forms, in all our communities, and be part of it. A way to bring us all together again, on every street, in every part of the city, because when this city speaks, we have a proper story to tell. This is Leeds 2023, and we need you, so get involved, be part of it, and together, we will let culture loose.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide, please. Oops. Thank you very much. So I hope that sort of both captures the extraordinary range and diversity of the city, but also tells you something about the opportunity that was afforded to us to really think about culture. And whilst being no longer part of a European capital of culture was heartbreaking for many, given the investment and the energy that had been put into that bid, there is something that has enabled us to really think about culture in its broadest remit. So we are talking about sport and food and the arts in that way when we talk about letting culture loose. We know we all have the capacity to dream and imagine, and a capacity to be really creative and playful. And sometimes the difficulties of our daily lives can make those things really hard. So our vision is really to think about a thriving city and region where creativity fuels opportunity for everyone. And given the 18 months, 2 years we've been through, I suppose our mission feels even more important than ever, that we deliver a landmark year of culture that really connects and benefits people now and in the future. And throughout our approach is our commitment to diversity, inclusivity and sustainability. Next one, Rob, please. What the framework of what we're trying to do is work across three specific functions, producing original work, 12 major events across the year, embracing the city centre and all 33 wards with a comprehensive programme, and a really strong creative education skills volunteering opportunities so that people can engage in all sorts of different ways. And as I said, we want to really think about sport, food and everyday creativity as being the breadth of all that is cultural in our city. Partnering across the city, the region and the nation, as well as internationally, feels really important to us. The thing to remember about Leeds, unlike Coventry and Hull, is that we've got a really strong and powerful cultural sector and infrastructure, and that is part of our job, is to amplify that and maximise those opportunities and really showcase the city's talent and capabilities across the world. And finally, we know that part of what we're trying to do is raise the profile of the city and region and its cultural offer regionally, nationally, and that's about promoting the city and really talking about culture in the ways that we know are both complex and thrilling and enable people to participate. You know, and ultimately we want every one of our citizens to really have an extraordinary and memorable year, something that will stay with them forever, because it's a moment in time that we want to really think about as being a catalyst for the city in its confidence and its ambitions and its aspirations. Next slide, please, Rob. I know Eve's already talked to you around some of the economic and social and cultural impacts, but just to reiterate, of course, we've only been an entity. I started in January 2020. It has been quite, I mean, I always knew it was going to be an extraordinary year, job and a scale of job, but actually the challenge has been huge. You know, we don't need to say too much, but trying to create an organisation to deliver under COVID conditions has been hugely challenging, but I'm thrilled to say that you know, we've got a growing team and we're delivering quite a wide range of things, but we know that our primary focus and our sort of objective is to help boost skills and job opportunities and retain talent. We know we want to enhance cultural education in schools. This city is renowned for its creative education programs. We know that, you know, inspiring children and young people who've had such a tough time because of COVID is really powerful, and culture can play its part, and creativity is really important for improving well-being and social cohesion. Of course, there is, you know, the previous experience knows that the impact of the investment we make helps attract additional visitors and additional investment into the city. And it feels really, really important to increase participation, particularly for people who feel that the arts might not be for them and face barriers in all sorts of ways. Part of what we're talking about in our programme is also about increasing the knowledge and history and the heritage of this extraordinary place and its people. And we want to really think about how we can be the kind of convener of making connections and ensuring that there's a greater collaborative and inclusive sector in the city beyond 2023. And again, as part of really celebrating and making a confident Leeds, our job is also to improve the national and international profile of Leeds as a city that has extraordinary cultural assets and hugely committed and diverse communities. Next slide, please, Rob. So what have we been up to so far? As I said, we've been setting up the organisation. You may have seen across earlier in the year in June that we launched our Letting Culture Loose campaign, which basically is partly to enhance this sense that there is culture happening everywhere in all our nooks and crannies across the whole of our city, and that we might sometimes not think some things are cultural, but they are all really, really important to tell the story of who we are in Leeds. We've secured to date £1.5 million additional investment. We know we've got a significant more to raise, but all the signs are strong, and there's great partnership working happening around bringing greater investment into the city. So far we've commissioned 65 artists. We've made work in communities as part of the launch event. We've secured some celebrity patrons, and we're working with the Leeds Cultural Education Partnership to really engage the cultural offer in schools, because we want to work across all schools and across all wards. Recently, Abigail and the team have done an extraordinary job on advocacy for the city and culture. Even last week, we were asked to chair at the Tory Party conference, a fringe event with the newly elected Arts Minister, who's delighted and would very much like to welcome him to the city to tell him, showcase what we've been up to. And you may have seen in the Yorkshire Evening Post some of the business club memberships that have been launched and the commitment that's coming through business. And of course, nothing can happen until we've developed and worked up and scoped out the programme of actual activity. So there's a lot of work happening on that front now. Thank you. I wanted to tell you about a specific project which is funded by the Arts Council, called My World, My City, My Neighbourhood, and that was an open call for artists to work in 23 artists to work in 23 wards. And again, that's really the sort of seeding of the opportunity of sort of creating a model that's called My Leeds 2023, with this idea that we want everybody to really think about how we might, how every person, every household, every street, every neighbourhood could create their own festival with a toolkit that we can help them develop to show off their creativity. So we can go to the next one, thank you. We of course are a city where the world is in our city and we are in the world, and part of our cultural ambition is to make sure that there is international reach, both in terms of partnering our artists with international artists and showcasing and thinking about future exports of talent in terms of, and projects, but also thinking about how we bring the most extraordinary international artists and creatives to the city. Obviously, Leeds has already got a really strong partnership in lots and lots of European cities and has its diaspora links. So we've managed to again secure some money from the British Council to create some collaborative commissions between artists in Leeds and international artists. We're working with Leeds City Council and its relationships to Lille, and looking at Lille, who was a European City of Culture, on learning an exchange programme. And just submitting an application to the Netherlands Embassy around partnering up with Dutch artists. And of course, India is a significant anniversary coming up in 22, but also the council is making huge connections with India, strengthening those, and we're working to look at some creative programs linked to that. We've been extraordinarily fortunate to have some internationally renowned UK artistic associates to help us build that program with us. So you may not know them, but there's 6 of them from all over the place, both UK, New York, France and beyond. Thank you. So we thought we'd just give you a little bit of insight of some work that we've just very, very recently done around audience mapping and just trying to understand what the public are telling us. And it's just some headline figures here that there is a huge demand for Leeds 2023, but also a huge appetite for culture. And of course, those of you who are over at Leeds at Light Night will know that the kind of energy and buzz that was in the city on Thursday and Friday. So we've discovered that there's 70% agree that culture and creative activities are good for the local economy. 79% are supportive of Leeds having a year-long celebration of culture, and 65% say they're likely to take part as an audience member, which are really strong numbers for us. And there is also great opportunity to really enhance the importance to learn about our city's history and heritage. You know, only 26% feel that they know a lot about the history and heritage of Leeds, and only 19% feel that they know a lot about the history of the communities and the people of Leeds. And we know that, you know, with over 170 languages spoken in the city, we really want to showcase all of that in its myriad forms. So we want to be more relevant, and we want to look at ways in which we can really increase those numbers when only 42% think that you know, cultural activities are for people like me, then actually we've got a job to do. So part of that is about really pushing that to, you know, as significant outcomes and engaging people in different ways to perhaps the way they feel they've been engaged so far. Thank you. So I guess as my final slide, I really just wanted to reiterate how this is only possible if we all work together. And if, you know, we know that the, you know, we want to deliver an extraordinary and transformational year. We know that culture and investment in culture can have huge economic and social impact. And we need the whole of the city to get behind us to help us make this possible, because only through working together can we make the most of the opportunity that's afforded by us by this moment. And I guess there is, you know, there's a great story to tell about placemaking here, and the power of good storytelling around shaping the future narrative of Leeds. And we really want to help make that possible and work with all of you to showcase the city in all its glory. And as I said, we know that culture can generate significant, you know, value added for a city and encourage investment. So any help any of you can offer and your colleagues can offer alongside us working closely with the City Council anyway, we'd be delighted to take you up on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Councillor Pryor, do you want to say anything at this point?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to talk briefly about some of the impact that a year like this can have. I think Cully's done a fantastic job at showing how exciting it is. But I think when you kind of read about a lot of these other years of cultures and some of the statistics, it is really exciting about what it can do for people's health and well-being, for mental health, for young people, but also the economy. Liverpool held a 10-year celebration recently of their, they were the European Capital of Culture a while ago, and they had their 10-year celebration in 2017. And this generated £108 million for the local economy. And we, through some analysis of Leeds 2023, we're looking at similar figures for here. So it's a huge return on the investment. I think we estimated an 8-to-1 return on investment, with the potential to create over 1,000 jobs in the city. But I think it would be remiss of me, given my portfolio, to not talk about some of the impact on young people as well. The Cultural Learning Alliance has done a study on what impact kind of that role in culture in the early years can have on young people. And their study has come out with that students from a low income who get involved in culture are 3 times more likely to get a degree. They're 20% more likely to vote, and young offenders are 18% less likely to reoffend. So I think there's an additional economic benefit, as well as the kind of the direct benefit to the visitor economy, that there's a huge benefit to how it can actually change young people's lives and actually take some pressure off a lot of the other services. So I'm really excited about the huge opportunities that this can have. I mean, Cully's presentation said that 65% of people in Leeds already say they're likely to take part in one of these events. And I hope that kind of as more information comes out about 2023, and even as the year progresses, that number will only go up. And I would love to see everyone in the city taking part in something at some stage, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pryor. Yeah, there's some really statistics that stood out. For example, the 79% supportive, which is pretty high, I'd say. And I take your point about the health and well-being, particularly as we come out of a pandemic, where that's probably one of the biggest challenges for people in the city. I'm going to move on to questions, if that's okay. I'll bring members in first. So first, bring in Councillor McKenna, who's indicated.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's very impressive what you have shown us. There's no question of it. And like you, I'm quite upset that we did lose Capital of Culture. I was very much involved in around that time, and clearly it was another price of Brexit, which I never supported, absolutely never supported. And I think the chickens are coming home to roost on that one in many, many areas, but I won't get any more political than that. When I was on the Primary Care Trust about 2004, we did some statistical work, not too far away, sorry, regarding health in our area, particularly in New Wortley. And one of the statistics we came up with was that the boy born in New Wortley today, whenever today is, his lifespan would be 12 years less than the same boy born in Pudsey on the same day. The latest figures I've seen is that's actually gone up to 14. I think there's been a good case made regarding the effects of good health from participating in culture in all its forms. But I have to say, in the inner city areas, I don't see much of that happening. It's vital, therefore, as far as I'm concerned, that we reach to all communities and we're inclusive. I mean, for instance, we don't have to make a case for anybody sat around this table to engage in culture. We all do. We go to shows in London, we go to ballet, we go to operas, we go to music events, we visit museums. We do all those things naturally. But if you're living on areas of my ward, like New Wortley, and you just had your universal credit reduced by £20 per week, culture, I'm afraid, is not going to be very much part of your plans for getting through the next week. You'll be thinking more of how you pay your heating now that that's shot through the roof, and how you feed your children. So I'd need a lot more convincing that the 12 major events you talk about, they're not all city centre based. You talk about events in the 33 wards. I'd certainly like to know how you're going to engage in my ward. And I'm sure people who represent inner city areas would put the same challenge to you. We have done our best in New Wortley, local ward councillors. We have helped out with sport. Sport is, well, not mentioned, but obviously it's a very important thing for towards good health for young people. We have put shows on the New Wortley Community Centre. We have supported events in the park, Armley Park and other things, but there's only so much we can do on the small limited funds we've got. So it's essential that the whole city benefit from this, not just, I'm afraid culture is often the domain of middle classes. I'm interested in people who are struggling week by week, year by year. So I would like some sort of assurance, more that's in the report, by the way, that these matters are being considered, they will happen, and people in the inner city areas will be invited. For instance, I wouldn't want to see all the major events take place in Leeds city centre. That would be totally wrong. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pryor.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. I agree with most of what you said. I do disagree that culture is the preserve of the middle classes. I do think culture is absolutely for everyone in all parts of society, and that is absolutely at the core of what Leeds 2023 is about. I don't know if you had a chance to go and see Light Night. You know, that was a great example of exactly, and it was a great example of that free event that was just open to everyone from wherever they are. When you talked about some of the health impacts, the same report I referenced earlier from the Cultural Learning Alliance said that people who engage in cultural activities are 38% more likely to report good health. And you know that has to have a huge impact on kind of the strain on the NHS. So you're absolutely right to highlight that. But I do just wanted to reassure you that these aren't just going to be some kind of exclusive event. They really getting through to all communities sits right at the heart of it. I think Cully's got some things to add.
Just a couple of things. Again, I completely understand, and one of the things I wanted to, prior to lockdown, one of the first things we did was actually go back to a primary school in Lower Wortley, actually, and met with their about 6 of their little youth council, and the youngest was about 6 and the oldest was 9. And we ended up spending a bit of time talking to them. The teachers were fantastic, talking about culture. And what was really interesting when you talked about, well, what difference might something like a year like this make? And it stayed with me completely because it's so poignant, and also I recognize it, which is that she said, well, this young girl who's 6 said, well, I like drawing and I want to do more drawing and painting. And I can do that at school, but sometimes it's hard. And then she said, and I said, do you do it at home? And she said, no, because I don't have any pencils or paper. And it was a sharp reminder, because I personally remember those things from my own childhood, that actually we've got a responsibility to make it as easy as possible for those communities and families where the impulse to be creative is really strong in everybody. And part of the My Leeds 2023 model is about creating a toolkit that we can get through into everybody's homes through the schools network and the work we're doing with community engagement. In terms of Light Night, for example, we supported Light Night, but actually what we were interested in was enabling Light Night to happen in Chapeltown, in Holbeck, and in Kirkstall. For the first time, it happened. There was activity that happened outside of the city centre. So we're really alert to that. We appreciate that we can't solve every challenge around poverty, every challenge around communities, but we have a role to play in making sure that as much of the programme as we can make happen can be free, as much of it can be participated in as easily as possible. So thinking about how people get to places, embedding some of that work in communities feels really important. And as I said, the Leeds 23 project that we've just talked about is about artists who are embedding themselves in their own communities to tell those stories in the way that those communities want them to be told. And I think, that the impact of that won't be immediate, but it's seeding some of that stuff to really showcase and create that sort of, to reduce those boundaries. But appreciate the question.
Do you want to go back?
Just very briefly, thank you for John's reply and yours. I think you meant New Wortley School. It's Castleton. The head teacher, co-head is Andrea Riley. Marvelous person. She does all the wonderful things you say, but it's very much a struggling community, and we have helped greatly. We did sponsor a trip to London and Parliament for them. Most kids in my area never see London, and they've now come up with another one which is quite expensive, and we'll do our best. We work very closely, and I appreciate what you're saying, but it's my job to keep the inner cities in the forefront of your mind. And that's what I'm doing. And if I've upset a few people, that's okay. I hope I haven't. I'm a big culture bug myself. I really am, but it's No matter what's been said, culture, depending on how you describe culture, is not available to many, many people in the inner city areas. Any survey would show us that. It's very, very expensive as culture, very, very expensive. But thank you, Chair, for encouraging me to go on.
I'll take that as a comment if that's all right. I think it's worth just noting the videos that we got sent around, circulated as members, which were different in communities, including one in Armley. And also be remiss of me not to mention Slung Low, who are based in Holbeck, clearly in a city ward, my ward. And I hope you'll be working with that sort of organisation that's actually grounded in the community, who've done lots of things that you said about providing paper and pencils and that sort of thing, and in paint, which is really important. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Firth next, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just wanted to actually, rather than make statements, I wanted to actually dig into the figures that are in the report to find out how actually this project, which is a fantastic international project, we can sometimes disagree on how it's delivered, financially or otherwise, but we want to look at how the impact and the legacy that it's going to have. There is a gaping hole to an extent in terms of what we're going to assess as the legacy of Leeds 2023. And it would be interesting to hear more on that particular point. The second point would be also about the mention about 23 wards and 23 communities through My World, My City, My Neighbourhood. I appreciate that it's 23 wards in the year for 2023, but we have, all right, well, it was mistaken up there, it was 23. So as a result, if it is 33, then I'm mistaken. But the other question was to ask, there are 6 schools mentioned to be consulted and part of the initial programme. Can you confirm where those schools are and what you've been doing with those schools? Thank you very much, Chair.
Eve, do you want to come back, please?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple of comments and then I'll pass across to the 2023 team to comment as well. So there's a very clear requirement in the grant agreement between ourselves and Leeds 2023 to measure the impact of the year, and I'll allow Collie and Abigail to tell you a little bit about that and the process they've gone through to identify a partner who is now in place, although I don't know if you can say who that is today. And then I think the particular project is actually around 23 artists in 23 wards for that particular project, but that there is a commitment for events to be right across the city in every ward in the year of culture itself. So do you want to answer the question about impact?
Yeah, I mean, impact is really important for us, and we're working quite closely with council around legacy planning as well. One of the things we've just in the process of agreeing has been a brief around evaluation and around research and valuation, and we're working with the Centre for Cultural Value and the Audience Agency to really scope out what that looks like, and that will kick off later this year. So that's very exciting to kind of know that we're also looking at both the historic data from other cities of culture, but also what is specific about Leeds, and also what in our strategic plan the objectives are that we're trying to measure and respond to. So we can certainly give you more information around those objectives, and those are being scoped up. In terms of the schools programme, the 6 schools, I haven't got the names in front of me, and forgive me, I can circulate those later, but that was an initial starting point. We are committed to working with the Leeds Cultural Education Partnership and engagement across all of the schools and different ways in which communities can respond and those young people can respond. And the 6th pilot project was really about learning, I guess. It was part of letting culture loose. So for example, some of those, some of the work with those young people was thinking about Leeds as a future city and what might they want to see, and some of that has then been taken on by an artist, and hopefully across the city later in the year you'll see the artwork that those young people have created that has been taken on by art students from the Arts University, and there's major poster campaign that will happen. So it's all layering the work and the voices of young people are part and parcel of our advocacy and campaign building, but it's also about looking at building relationships, testing things and growing them out to a wider context. The other thing I would say, and it would be remiss of me not to, which is for all of last year, there was 4 staff in terms of delivering what we've delivered so far. We've got a team of just under 25 now, but it's only just beginning to, so our ability to be really embedded has been hampered by the context we're working with, but also the resource that we have available. So we're trying to be really smart about how we work in partnerships. So, you know, Slunglow are a really significant partner for us in terms of the work they're doing in Holborn. We're trying to look at across all of the wards where the anchor institutions. Completely want to reassure you that the 23 and 23 is again a pilot programme. We also know that there's a strategy for the other neighbourhoods around the other wards to look at making sure that there is something in across all 33. And again, with our sort of cultural partners like Harewood House or Sunnybank Mills, you know, there's lots of conversations about how they might maximise what they already do and how we can enhance that and connect that through some of the strands we're doing.
Thank you. Just to say that we'll probably want you to come back in future to see how that develops, because that legacy, what the actual statistics are, and I'm also about making sure you do hit all the wards. So, Councillor Firth, I'm just trying to support your point there.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that response. The reason I asked that question is obviously slogans are all well and good, but obviously this is about changing lives. And I think the biggest thing for when it comes to Leeds 2023 is that, yes, there is that potentially the issue of, and I'm very glad, Cully, you mentioned Harewood House, because I was going to ask, given that it was 23, what was the spread, what in terms of also looking at the schools, where was the spread, really to understand, because of the fact that I represent a ward in the northeast of this city that I appreciate is one of the most prosperous wards in the city, but also there are communities within my ward and in the outer northeast, particularly also I mentioned Wetherby, for example, which are significantly further than anywhere else in the city from the city centre. And as a result, reaching out to those particular areas is a particular concern for our representatives in terms of trying to make sure that we can deliver that. And ultimately, I want to be on a position where we can understand how we can ultimately achieve that aim and what the Culture Trust and others want to achieve. And that particular point, then, as a result, can I ask, in terms of looking at that, do you have any sort of geographical information on where those spreads would be, instead of actually knowing where they actually were? And ultimately, what has that programme involved, and what is that looking to achieve as it goes forward to make sure that we can involve as many as possible? Thank you, Chair.
Chair, may I suggest that that's something that we can come back to scrutiny on specifically, because it's quite early days for the Culture Trust in terms of getting the impact baseline, and we probably also need to advise about the data by ward and how we can help present it. So would it be okay to address that as part of a future discussion?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But I think the point to take from the board is that members want to see it across the city. Yeah. Members want to see the inner city deprived areas included. So I think that's the points that's worth noting when you're devising in that plan.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate again, that is noted in the grant agreement between ourselves and the Culture Trust. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Are you satisfied with that, Councillor Firth?
I do have a further question, but I'll bring it in later if that's all right, Chair. Thank you.
So I guess if you're asking questions now, let's crack on with your questions.
I need to have a think about and hear some further responses before I come back in, if that's all right, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation and a couple of questions, if I may. Just on Councillor McKenna's and Councillor Pryor's comments, I agree with what both of you said, really. And I think it's about how we perceive culture, which when I read the report is kind of missing because I think lots of people are excluded in inverted commas for cost or perception or whatever that reason may be. But I agree totally with what Councillor Pryor said. It is everybody's domain, but it's about getting that message to people, isn't it? And I think a lot of the language has been very middle class. It has been very exclusive. But if you drill down into different groups, then they are all undoubtedly very proud of their culture, whatever that group may be. It may be a geographical group or an ethnic group, but they are very proud of their culture. So perhaps it would be an idea, and forgive me if I'm being arrogant, to incorporate some of that, because when I was reading this, it's very linear in terms of what culture actually is. And for different groups, culture is different things, and that's the way to engage a wider group of people. And my question was, and I think you've kind of touched on it, Councillor Firth, it's about how things are evaluated, particularly around the health and well-being, and even below that around the mental health statistics. It's an area I'm particularly interested in. And how on earth will you measure that when we have lots of people who don't identify ever until they reach crisis? So I'm very interested, because the kind of headline targets out there, and I hope that they are achieved, but I'm very interested in how that will be evaluated and measured, and what the returns will be.
Councillor Pryor.
Yeah, I think Councillor Burke is entirely correct. I mean, culture it's in our parks, it's in our social clubs, it's in working men's clubs. They really are. It's completely embedded in our community. So when I was 8 or 9, I used to learn Irish dancing in a community centre run by the local St Kitts community, where that was, and that was like a real kind of communities on top of each other, sharing the same spaces, sharing culture. Culture it's food, it's sport. There are elements of culture that are expensive. Councillor McKenna mentioned, big trips to the theatre or the opera or the ballet. And I think the trouble is, when people hear the word culture, that's where their mind immediately goes to. But it is so much more than that. And for a lot of people, culture is what you do every day. It's what who you are, who you're surrounded by. And I think those are some of the strands we really want to pull out throughout Leeds 2023. So you're absolutely right to highlight that. And I do just want to reassure you that is part of it completely.
And just in terms of measurement, Councillor, so we're doing a lot of work around developing the adoption of the Social Progress Index for the Council to help us measure the delivery of inclusive growth. And in that index, we want to include measures around culture, but it will also include measures around health and well-being. So that is not the specific measurement of the impact of Leeds 2023, which I think Collie and Abigail are better to answer on that one, but we are trying to ensure that over time we can measure the long-term impacts of those areas. And if you're interested in hearing about that, I'll send some links through afterwards so you can just see a bit more. Barking and Dagenham have adopted it in their council and using it really effectively, so I'll send it to Robert afterwards for a bit more information about that.
Yes, do please circulate. I think we would be interested in that. Councillor Burke, do you want to go back?
Thank you, that'd be really useful. And I just wanted to mention about morbidity, which is a really key element, isn't it? And it would be fantastic if that was included as a measurement as well, particularly through this project and bid. I read an article last week about, sorry, Andrew, women in Olbeck, the worst area in the country for women in Olbeck to live in terms of life expectancy. So it would be really useful if we could use something like this as a vehicle. And I don't know how much impact it could have, but any impact would be really positive, wouldn't it? Thank you.
It does include life expectancy as one of the measures in there, along with things like air quality and so on. So as I say, I'll pop a link through so that you've got more information around. There is a reference to it in the report, but not in any detail.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the point Councillor Burke is making around mortality being one, but morbidity being another factor is really important point to highlight there, whereas you can be alive and have a poor quality of life, can't you? Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Hamilton next.
Thank you. I won't ask certain questions because they've been asked already. It's just, you mentioned the 33 wards, that there'll be a couple of, you know, events maybe. Can I just say it will probably need to be more than a couple? And I know in here it's mentioned the carnival. Well, the carnival isn't the only culture event that people attend. There's a lot more going on, you know, within inner Northeast Leeds I'm talking about. So I do hope you all will. I know it's a big task coming on, but there'll be more than just the ones that are known. You know, there's others that take place. And then my question is, it's stated that there'll be about 1,000 jobs created. Are these 1,000 jobs, are they going to be continuous after, or is it just for the year? You know, because it's great, 1,000 jobs, but at the end of 2023, what's going to happen? You know, they're going to continue move on elsewhere. And also, we are excited about the 2023. We want the whole of Leeds to be excited regarding the 2023, like the Tour de France, but that came like just a couple of weeks before. This, you know, is coming 2023. So are you starting to get the city excited? I don't see anything. I mean, okay, I'll give you a chance because you said you've got 25 staff now. So, you know, just about promoting it and getting the city behind it, because at first when the Tour de France came, it was quiet, nobody won't bother. But then the old city, you know, got all excited, and that's what I'd like to see for 2023. So starting from next year sometime, let's start getting people the feel-good factor after we've been through this pandemic. So that's what I'd like to see next year. But just about the jobs, that's my question. Thanks.
Thank you. Eve, do you want to comment on that?
The figure around the jobs came from some analysis that our colleagues from the Culture Trust commissioned. So I don't know the detail of that without referring back to the report. Cully and Abigail may, but if they don't, we might need to get back in writing. And I'm sure Cully would also want to just advise about how we're getting people excited about the year of.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, letting culture loose was an initial launch around really broadening the sort of sense of what culture is, and that different communities celebrate culture in different ways, and the stories we want to tell about that. We're working really in very close partnership this year with Yorkshire Evening Post, for example, which on a whole programme that's called Hello Leeds, about introducing Leeds to Leeds, and highlighting some of the activity that's happening across all of our communities, but also in very particular grassroots cultural activity to really showcase the diversity that's happening there. It's been so successful that they've actually now extended a weekend culture column, and you'll see that again, hopefully that's beginning to really impact in the way people talk about the city and its cultural offer. I'm going to pass over to Abigail, because obviously she's leading on a lot of the comms and advocacy, and can talk a little bit more about the plans ahead.
Thank you. Yes, so the partnership with the Yorkshire Evening Post is really critical, but we do want to make sure a lot of people who don't read the Yorkshire Evening Post do know about Leeds 2023. And so with that in mind, we have to work with the other messengers in the city. We can't do it on our own. So the council has set up a tourism-wide group. So we're working together with all the tourism partners in the city to think about how we might dress the city for the Year of Culture. We're going to be thinking about how we might work with communities so they can create their own version of Leeds 2023 physically in their own communities. So those are conversations that are starting to happen. But we have to work with partners on that. We cannot do that on our own. So people like the Leeds Bid, but then also kind of council colleagues working in the districts to think about how the district centres can be animated for the Year of Culture. So that will be work that certainly is starting now, but that we have to continue next year.
Councillor Pryor, yep.
Yeah, so we can circulate some of the details about the job creation later, but I've just got a bit of it in front of me. So it was a report from Bob Consulting, and they looked at the UK cities of culture from Hull and Derry, looking at their economic impact, and based on kind of where we are with 2023 and how much could be invested, it was around 1,300 new jobs in 2023, rising to 1,600 by 2030. And a lot of this is because it kind of generates that income for the visitor economy. It's pumping money not just into cultural institutions, but into bars, restaurants, hotels, and it does kind of, it grows the economy in that way. And where we are with 2023, you know, before COVID, it was a fantastic opportunity for Leeds, for our city to kind of grow the economy in that direction. I think since COVID, it's actually become crucial to our recovery. You know, our city centres and local centres have had a battering. You know, a lot of businesses are really struggling. The cultural sector and the service industries were very much the kind of the first to close and the last to open. And this is a real opportunity to give them a much needed economic boost, which will last years beyond 2023.
Just going on to that, thank you for that. With regards to, you mentioned about the businesses, first to close, last to open. However, the 2023, are we involved with the businesses to try and get them on board? We know that they're suffering at this moment in time, but for them to see what the potential will be, if they'll become involved in you know, and what funding are they putting in? What will they provide? You know, has that been taken into consideration?
So thanks, Councillor. So from one of the good things about culture and economy being in my portfolio together is that working with the other heads of service, we're very clear about the opportunity that resides in the wider economy. So we are working already proactively with some of the key stakeholders, as Abigail said, around the visitor economy, for example, and Councillor Pryor was talking about the jobs increase. After the Year of Culture in Liverpool, they saw an increase in the number of visits to the city for the visitor economy, which did not dip. So they made a real step change in their visitor economy, which was then retained because people became aware of what the culture offer was in Liverpool. So we are already working with some of those partners, and that work will increase over time. And we have good partnerships with people like the Leeds Hotels and Venues Association, and on the culture side with the major institutions and the heritage sites in the city as well. And we're working at the moment to make sure we put the right structures and partnerships in place so we can maximise on that, and you'll see more in the coming months.
Can you make sure you include the market? I'd like to see the market, Leeds market, decorated and vibrant. We need more footfall there, so you know, to get people there. And you know, like the 30th of this month, there is the Black History taking place. If those sort of people were involved in rallying, and you know, let's get Leeds City market up and vibrant again as well. And that's it from me.
Councillor Pryor.
Just a very brief point, because Kirkgate Market also comes under my portfolio. And I think Kirkgate Market is a great example of kind of, it's a cultural institution as well as somewhere to buy things. And actually, when we've been tracking footfall return in the city centre and Kirkgate Market, it's returning faster in Kirkgate Market than the rest of the city centre. And it just shows when you've got that additional cultural offer, that brings people in.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Cully, do you want to comment as well?
Just a very quick note, just as a reminder that, you know, despite COVID, we brought in an additional £1.5 million last year, up to date. And we know that part of that has been in working in partnership with some of the anchor institutions like the universities, but also some of the key businesses in the city. We're also kind of working closely with some of those key, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm. And obviously for some people, there's a real, they've had difficulty thinking about 23 because they're dealing with such immediate concerns. But actually every conversation we've had with a whole diverse range of people has been enthusiastically received, and people want to support, sometimes with cash, sometimes in kind, sometimes through doing stuff for us. So I think we're galvanizing that in all sorts of ways. We recognize some of the challenges that people have, but I think the fact that we managed to bring in that investment in such hard circumstances bodes well for the times ahead, despite the fact that we've got a really tight timeline to deliver to, which is itself a challenge.
Thank you very much. Just on the point of getting the news out, I think it's worth making sure you link with ward members and the local media outlets, which I'm sure you will do. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor. Are you satisfied, Councillor Hamilton? Yep. Okay, Councillor Carlisle.
Thanks, Jay. It comes from some of the conversations we've had and your point just there, but really what we've heard probably from everyone is all the experience that ward members have of their areas. And I think what I was going to bring out was how ward members would then be involved, because you look at the different areas across the communities, and if there's someone that knows the potential and the impact that placemaking could have, and you don't need to sell any of the benefits of culture to me at all. I've seen it in many communities that we need to have, and so I completely see the value here. But when you look at that, I mean, you talk about, for instance, my ward, Carverley and Farsley, then people will know of Sunnybank Mills. That's there, that's showing our heritage. People may know of Carverley Old Hall, a nationally renowned medieval hall in the village, but people might not know that, for instance, before COVID, we had our first Eid Mailer in the community. And there is that community, there's the stories that ward members will know that aren't necessarily heard, because they aren't what people would immediately think of when they think of your area. And they're probably the people that don't come together often and share them. You know, so the mailer would never happen at Sunnybank Mills, for instance, because that's two communities that probably wouldn't see that connection, but there's the heritage that they have that joint there. You have a community that is new to that area, shall we say, but has heritage that they could bring, and there's a lot of understanding that they could enhance among communities in that area. They're also less likely to know all the heritage that the people that live in the villages that I live know, because we have a wealth of heritage and history that's there of that village. So it's all that bringing communities together. But I think really ward members are the ones that probably would be able to point that out. So just around how you work with ward members, because I mean, I can see the potential in my area. I'd love to tell everyone exactly what I'd love to see in my area, some of which I'm sure is deliverable and not, but I'm sure, you know, other members would as well, as we've heard from stories from the inner city communities as well, where I see absolutely the value.
Councillor Pryor.
I think you make a great point, and I think we need to, as 2023 develops, work more with members. Obviously, the piece that Councillor Firth mentioned, the 23 wards, is just one of the events. And I know there's been a process that started where some members in some of the areas have been reached out by some of the artists working with 2023. But I think the vision is to have members involved at every stage, because there are going to be a huge number of events that are all going to be kind of slightly different in different areas, because you're absolutely right, members know their communities kind of better than most. They'll know, because one ward is not just one community either, it's several layered on top of each other and around each other, and it's members who will be able to unlock a lot of that. So that'll be a key thing going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor. Okay, I'm going to bring in Councillor Anderson next.
I'll try not to repeat too much, but just a quick word on the cost of attendance. I got a copy of a brochure, it happened to be from the Grand yesterday, where their prices start from £19 up to £70. And so fine, you might argue that £19 is affordable, but you ain't going to get much of a view. And are we saying that these people who pay £19 should be getting a second-class service? I do think we've got to look at some of these institutions and whether or not they are overly pricing people out, to be quite frank, because there are some sections of the community, well, £70 nothing to them, let's be quite frank, whereas other people, you know, it's a month's worth of savings on something, and I think we've got to look at that. But going on from that, the legacy funding, we've argued, well, some of us have been arguing in this council for some time about the funding of this. So when it comes to the legacy funding, Are you in discussions with people like Victoria as to how you're going to be taking this forward, or are you going to go for more sponsorship to offset it going forward? Fine, up to 2023, we've had the debate, we've had the argument, but after that, it's how can we take it on in our communities? Where's that funding going to come from? Because as community committees, our money's been getting cut back, so we can't really find that money, because then it means cutting back on something else. Then I would suggest that we need to get meetings set up with ward members, and if not ward members, community committees very quickly to see what can be delivered or what support is already in existence. For example, I would give you Ralph Thorsby High School's theatre, which to me could be utilised. Now that's in my ward, that's me being parochial, but every other councillor can probably come up with examples in their own areas where there are facilities that could be utilised. Guiseley Theatre, for example, there's a whole raft of other ones. So I think it's some, and also we need to look at speaking to some of the parish and town councils as to what they can do to stimulate in their area, because again, being partially political about it, they're getting an absolute fortune in community infrastructure levy in some of those areas now. So they're not necessarily going to be poor, so they could then start putting some things back in again. I do think we need to look at taster sessions so that some people can understand what is opera. You know, I was invited to attend, I think it was about 6 minute presentations or something in the Grand, because I couldn't, in all honesty, tell you. I mean, I can speak English, and that's barely, because I speak Scottish more than anything else, but never mind Italian. So, you know, I think it's important that we look at how we get taster sessions out to these people. The other thing is, well, is accessing it is public transport. In my ward, once you get past about 10 o'clock at night, you're marooned. Public transport, and that I've no doubt. I mean, I once attended a presentation where people in Holbeck were complaining that their bus service was pathetic. So, you know, it's not just an outer area one. So we need to look at, when we're running these events, are the bus companies, that's assuming that by that time the West Yorkshire Mayor hasn't managed to do what she's planning to do, but it's still First Bus that are, you know, one of the major players. Are they going to rise to the challenge of putting on public transport so that people can get to and from? And the other thing is sponsorship and subsidy. I'm talking about these £70 tickets. Can we not get some organisation to subsidise some of those tickets so that some of these people can experience what it's like to sit in the Grand Theatre and sit in good seats in the Grand Theatre, and the experience it will have? You know, for example, the one I was looking at yesterday was Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. Now that's going to be fantastic to see how they're going to get this bed to float around. Now, children are going to be absolutely fascinated by that. And if you're sitting up in the gods, you'll not really see it. That's the thing I'm getting at. It gets people's passion. So I'm finished. You were glad to know.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Just for people watching, whilst it says Councillor Diane Chapman on the video, speaking has been Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pryor, do you want to respond?
Yes. Quite a wide-ranging question there. There are some elements of that which you know, aren't necessarily within the purview of 2023. Things like kind of price points for tickets that the Grand Theatre put on. I know that I'm on the board of Opera North, and I know Opera North do kind of a huge amount to try and get new audiences in, kind of targeting at young people, doing cheaper tickets. So I know some theatre companies are doing that. I think Bed Knobs and Broomsticks might be a bit more commercial. So, you know, if they've brought them into theatre, there might be less opportunity to do that, but it kind of outrageous, Councillor Firth. So some of this is beyond the purview of 2023. I know that, again, Opera North has done things like the whistle stop operas, which were kind of short ones in more public places. I know that maybe 7 hours of Wagner's Ring Cycle might be not quite entry-level opera. So there have been efforts to, try and introduce people slowly. And I think, when again, it goes back to some points we've made before about what culture is, and it is so much more than that kind of almost high culture, I suppose some might call it. And that really is at the heart of 2023, about getting through to all communities. I think some of your comments about public transport are absolutely valid, and I think that's something we need to look at going forward. It's not something we can, 2023 can't directly instruct, but I think your point is really important about having those conversations, and we'll certainly look to working with community committees and parish and town councils. Absolutely.
Thank you. I think there's also just a bit of a challenge around using those ambassador roles. So one of the things Child Friendly Leeds does, for example, is brings in so Healthy Holidays has brought in children into the city centre for the dinosaurs. And if somehow, as a legacy, the Culture Trust can do some of that sort of stuff, I think that'd be very positive. Eve, did you want to comment as well?
Yeah, just to address some of the other points that were made by the councillor. So in relation to long-term funding, I think there's a huge opportunity to work really closely with the Culture Trust to increase philanthropy into the arts and culture, and to try and sustain that philanthropy, as well as sponsorship from the private sector. But there is work to be done to think about how we want to achieve that. And I'm sure Victoria will be pleased to hear that my team have been thinking about how we can drive up income in innovative ways around sponsorship to support the whole of the Leeds City Council Culture Service, for example, museums and galleries. So that's very much on the radar, councillor. I think there's been 2 points now made about member engagement, and I think we need to come back with you just to kind of confirm how we'll make sure we do that really well over the next few years. And transport, just to add, that has been suggested. Abigail mentioned the group that's come together around visitor welcome, that had also picked up that question about transport and whether there's something we could do in the year. But we're very early days in terms of an idea that then needs some discussion and how feasible it is. I sit on the Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Committee as well, and there's lots of discussions around transport there, so I know how difficult some of that might be, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at it. Okay.
Thank you, Eve. Kelly, do you want to speak?
Just one tiny thing by way of note, which is that the research we've done and the feedback we're getting from people like National Heritage Lottery funds, or some of the Arts Council funding programmes, or indeed some of the other philanthropic and foundations, is that actually Leeds doesn't ask sufficiently from some of those resources, and part of our role is to build a capacity in the city for it to be known, to be able to go out there and bring that, to increase the ask from National Heritage Lottery around heritage work, and to build those relationships more strongly and network them within the city. And we have begun to do that, so that's really exciting. And I think that will also have a longer term legacy impact in terms of investment being sustained and brought into the city by those organisations.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that's really important, that legacy point. Do you want to come back, Councillor Anderson? Okay, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Actually, I think everybody's covered what I wanted to say. It was very much around the ward member engagement, community committees, but also the local community groups. There's quite a lot of groups, it's certainly my ward, that actually organise events. It would be nice to link in with them and let them develop things locally.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. I'll take that as a supportive comment, if that's okay. And clearly that is a comment that's been made by a number of members, and I'm sure the whole board supports that. The thought behind that comment. I'm going to bring Councillor Firth back in.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's been interesting to hear some of the responses, further to adding a bit more meat on the bone, because I have to stress out, I'm a little concerned, but I appreciate there are other issues, but there are a number of questions we come today where that information is going to have to be provided after this meeting. And obviously we want to hold everything that public money, taxpayers' money is going into account. And so certainly in the future, hopefully we can reflect on that information and we're able to have an even more robust discussion as well. The one thing I wanted to add in particular was I was a little bit concerned, Councillor Pryor, by and that's where I want to see more flesh on the bone about the legacy, that only 300 jobs by 2030 would be the legacy, extra on top of what was already created in 7 years after 2023 in relation to the year specifically. But I appreciate that that may be more flesh on that in the future. The other question I really wanted to ask was, obviously, it is going to provide an economic boost, which we need to provide to many communities that also have been hurt by the past few months. And certainly let's hope that this accessibility question that has been raised is one that we can address in more detail, simply because of the fact that, yes, it may be an economic boost for the city, but if people don't have an economic boost as well, then they may not be able to actually access that. And I don't want to get into a political discussion about it, but certainly it is a quandary that we need to cross. The third and final point I was going to raise, which is my question, is actually about what Eve said earlier, which I noted, which is that public investment remains significant at 8.8 million. And obviously it has been announced, and obviously the report itself didn't reflect the fact that the trust is obviously looking, unfortunately, for a new chair, but also as the positive news of 6 new sponsors, including partners around the city. Could you give us a bit more detail about what their involvement will be? Obviously, there's private sector businesses, there is a university involved, etc. Can you give us what involvement that will be? And also, what is the actual ambitions for sponsorship in terms of actually expanding that in the future as we lead into 2023 and you look to achieve £32 million or there, or wherever we're able to achieve to fundraise for the year? Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Firth. Going to bring in Eve.
The Culture Trust have a very structured approach to seeking business sponsorship with different gradings, and are in the process at the moment of going about securing that sponsorship. I don't know, Abigail, whether you just want to provide some headlines.
Sure. Thank you for the question. We've developed a corporate sponsorship scheme which starts with the Leeds 2023 Business Club members. So that is the scheme that you've seen where we've had 6 partners across the city, and that is anything from £5,000 up to £25,000. So small businesses who might be keen to get involved feel, are at the level that they can get involved, but also at the higher level. And then we've got a series of headline sponsor levels that are much more significant than those levels, and season sponsors, because it's likely we'll divide the year into 3 seasons. So those are the national companies that we're aiming for. So we're having discussions with all the businesses that you might associate with things like the Tour de France, for example. But as our colleagues over in Birmingham are finding, those corporate conversations, they are challenging because of the impact of COVID on those businesses, but we remain hopeful that we can convert those. They just take a bit longer. So we're also doing a range of fundraising events this autumn in London in order to link up those key businesses in Leeds that have their national bases in London, so that we can make sure that they can see the national impact of what we're trying to do here. So we've got a range of possibilities developing in front of us, and as well as cultivating the kind of philanthropy, as Eve mentioned, those high net worth individuals that have strong links with Leeds and who support culture, but also sport, I would say. So we've talked about how sport is going to be part of our year of culture, which is unique, and that offers us an opportunity to engage those businesses that are also keen on sport.
Thank you. Just for clarity, I think you said you're aiming for 32 million in total, and I think about quarter is from council funded ultimately. Is the 1.5 million you mentioned in the presentation, is that how much we secured so far? And so we've got another sort of 70 odd, 65% to raise still.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's we're working on 3 different scenarios really, and our ambition is to try and aim for 32 million. But of course, the context we're working in is incredibly complex and variable. So and the timeline is very fixed. You know, it's not like we can say, actually, let's do it in 24 or 25, or let's delay it. So we're going to have to be really responsive to the circumstances we find ourselves in. We imagine that the percentage, you know, given the research of cities of culture elsewhere, we know that public investment is really critical, and a large percentage in order to leverage corporate and philanthropic giving, but that's still not going to, you know, it still needs to be significant. So the BOP analysis that you've seen is based on 20 million, a programme of 20 million. We're still striving to do a 32 million programme.
Thanks, Kelly. Councillor Firth, did you want to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair. No, I think that appreciate the answer. The concern is obviously we're talking about the legacy of Leeds 2023, and we're talking about the actual activity and what's going to happen in Leeds 2023. And there is obviously a concern about the fact of where we want to set our ambitions for this year. I appreciate that there have been extenuating circumstances, but at the same time, as obviously with that limiting time that is available, being able to make sure that we can actually achieve certain things and actually make sure that, as colleagues have said across this board, that we can reach all those communities. For example, in my ward, which is not one homogenous community, it is a variety of multiple, over 10 or well up to 15 villages, in which each village has its own individual community, individual projects and individual attitude to certain things in terms of trying to do what they want and how they want to be represented. And as a result, I just wondered if potentially we can talk about more generally, really what is going to be in the next year in terms of what is your plans and ambitions to have those plans in place, and where do you see yourself in the coming forward months? Thank you.
Kelly?
Just in terms of the timelines we're working to, we're doing quite a lot of scoping work on projects this side of Christmas. We want to launch a Year to Grow sort of headline sponsors at the beginning of the year, with the idea that in on the 23rd of September 22, it'll be 100 days to go to the events, and we will be announcing the full programme. In terms of, I can't at this moment say to you, we can absolutely guarantee that this is the level of investment we will secure. What I can say is that we're working really hard, both with city colleagues and with our cultural colleagues and peers, to try and maximise the opportunity that this commitment by the City Council has given us to generate additional resource and impact. We know that that's already had a very significant national impact in the fact that, you know, DCMS and all of the levelling up agenda, we are part of those conversations, and we can amplify what Leeds' ask is. You know, I think it says something about the city that, you know, it was me that was being asked to chair a roundtable discussion around culture and creativity with the arts minister, who had only been appointed 2 days before, and that it was in Manchester, and there's lots of Manchester people that could have done that. So I think it says something about where the weight that we're carrying and the amount of advocacy we have achieved to date, given that we're such a small and very recent entity. So whilst not being complacent, I do think that, you know, we are passionate about trying to get that level of investment and delivering to those sorts of ambitions. We may not get there all with everything, but we'll do our damnedest to try to.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Okay, Councillor Burke, did you want to speak as well?
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question, you'll be pleased to hear. It's just a plea, really, because I think one of the things that the Royal We, are all guilty of is losing stories. And as people age and die or move from that community, those stories are inevitably lost. And I'd like to see, as part of the 2023, is that we had communities capturing those stories, so we could perhaps at the end of the year have a Leeds book. I mean, it'd probably be a very weighty book or a series of books, but that would be fantastic. If you think of things like Burton's used to employ 30,000 people, and as they have got older and died, there's not very many of them left. So it'd be great to capture some of them. The heavy engineering in Hunslet, it's, people still remember. And that is actually part of the culture of this city. And it'd be great to pass that on to children. So it could involve schools and things like that.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Councillor Pryor, Eve, Kelly and Abigail. This has been a really useful conversation. I hope you've taken our challenge in the way it's intended, is to improve Leeds and the cultural offer. I think there's quite a few things to take away. I'm sure you'll be in touch with Rob, but thank you very much for your attendance and your input. And we look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Thank you. I've been asked by members for a short comfort break, given that it's been a long item. I'm minded to do that. So if we pause the meeting for 5 minutes while we use the facilities, remind members to turn off their microphones at this stage, and we'll resume shortly. Thank you. Okay, we're going to resume the meeting. Thank you, everyone. So moving on to agenda item 8. So this is the joint inquiry with Councillor Anderson's board as well. I'd just like to stress that we need to be very much focused and mindful on the terms of reference that we have as a scrutiny board, and focus on the resources element rather than necessarily service delivery, particularly historic service delivery. And with that, I'm going to hand over to John Woolmer. You can assume we've read the papers, but if there's anything you want to highlight, and also if Councillor Firth wants to make any comments, you're also welcome to make some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, and really, because I know we're pressed for time. As the Chair said, I'll assume that people read the report. What I've tried to do is provide, I hope is a useful appendix to present a baseline position, so that the board are all on the same page, really, in terms of understanding how we currently collect waste, and in particular the recyclable waste across Leeds. In terms of the methods where we take it, how it's processed, where it's processed, and the current outcomes that we achieve as a city in terms of the recycling tonnages and the values of that waste in terms of the current market, and how much that all costs. So that's really to give you a baseline to work from. The report itself sets out the scope of the inquiry. And really it's to focus on the looking forward at the recycling options that the city will have choices to make. There's reference in the terms of reference to the current national resource waste strategy, which is a key driver in terms of what we will be required to do in the future. And that's very much where we are at the moment with our own waste strategy, waiting on the government's direction, really, in terms of legal requirements in terms of waste management. So very quickly, the two or three things that have a big influence on our decision making and what we will be able to do is what we'll be legally required to collect from the curbside in the future. So the current consultation is on proposals around food waste and glass. So the devil will be in detail of that in terms of what will be legally required and what councils will be able to vary at a local level from something that's called technical, environmentally and economically practical, abbreviated TEEP. So we need some clarification around that from government around what we'll be able to do more locally. And then obviously another key element of that will be what the government will fund. The strategy sets out some key assumptions around that, and still the consultation at the moment is still on the basis that the government will fully fund any additional requirements that we legally need to pick up. And I think the third thing just to mention as well, and I'll shut up, is the other key part of the strategy talks around glass and around the introduction of deposit return schemes across the country. And again, we await further news on that, because that could have a big bearing on what we do in Leeds in terms of whether we collect from the curbside or not. I'll leave it there, Chair, if that's okay, and take any questions.
Thank you, John. I'm going to bring in Councillor Firth if other members want to indicate if they want to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to speak, and thank you for that introduction, John. I just wanted to, obviously, this is addressing today the terms of reference of the scrutiny inquiry that obviously I know our colleagues and fellow colleague Councillor Anderson's board of the Environment Board have been looking at previously, and obviously we want to establish the terms of reference for this scrutiny board's part of the inquiry. As a result, I have a number of suggestions of particular areas that I think should be within our remit as we go forward. I think, first of all, obviously, the issue is finance. Obviously, certainly investigating the overspend in the department to look into what the nature of that is and whether the resource is being adequately allotted to the department from elsewhere in the council or from other pots to be able to ensure that it's still able to deliver its basic service. The cost of missing routes, and in terms of that, actually not just the routes that are on the end of day report, but also those that are then actually recovered afterwards that are in addition to those that are not reported. I would also like to see potentially the comparison of what the cost would be. And I know that some colleagues may be aghast by this, but what the comparison would be to private involvement or a subcontracting or contracting out of the service to another service, i.e. potentially looking at how other services within our city, particularly in relation to rubbish and waste, are performed, and whether that should be another way to be able to tackle and provide that basic service to our residents. I also think that there is a particular point to mention as well, which is a mention in Appendix 2, which is in relation to the policy established in 2014 of one brown bin per household for those that have it at the moment. And I'd like to ask, what is the amount of money that this council has made from selling extra bins to residents to now tell them following the pandemic or during the pandemic that they then can't have that bin collected, and how much money the council has made as a result of that, and then as a result being able to tackle that as well. Those are the particular areas that I certainly think we need to look at in part of this remit. Thank you very much, Chair.
Just to comment first, Councillor Firth, the terms of reference were agreed by Councillor Anderson's board, delegating some of the responsibilities to our board. You were invited to the Scrutiny board where they were agreed, but I don't think you managed to attend. And so the challenge for us is we've been delegated certain role already. I'll need to work with my Scrutiny officer and Councillor Anderson about what elements of that we can bring in terms of making sure we stick within our terms of reference. I think it's a really important point to make, that the terms of reference are delegated to some extent from Councillor Anderson's board, who's already met and agreed them. Just want to make that comment. Do you want to come back to me on that?
Absolutely, Chair. And please don't make aspersions about why I potentially didn't attend a meeting. One thing I wanted to ask is in terms of the situation as well. I think the one thing I want to say is that actually it's about expanding the terms of reference, because there is a particular reason that's affecting everybody across our city, that if they're not part of terms of the reference, that at least they are covered in this inquiry, because they are absolutely critical to us going forward. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, and so the challenge has been making sure we look at what our Scrutiny board's role is, and other issues are picked up by Councillor Anderson and his board, which would then fall within that board's remit. I'm aware they are having a separate private meeting with officers about some of the legacy issues, at which I understand you've also been invited to. But I think in terms of reference, well, I need to take that away and work with Rob, the Principal Scrutiny Officer, in terms of what that is, and liaise with Councillor Anderson. I hope you can understand that. Okay, do you have another question? Is that okay, Councillor Firth?
That's absolutely fine, Chair. I just think it's just from the outset, obviously establishing that we want to make this a robust inquiry from our perspective as the Strategy and Resources Board, to ensure that the taxpayers' money that is being spent is obviously what is our role in terms of actually making sure that that is scrutinised and that we have the best performing service we can. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Carlisle.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking again at just in terms of the terms of reference that are there, and I know there's conversations around, so I'll just put points in that either of you might want to then take on, because there's just some difficulties when I've then reflected on them around what's there. Because the first point, for instance, that comes to us, and I'll try and keep to our Scrutiny board as much as possible, is around the costs associated with offering additional recycling services. But I guess there's a point there at which this flips between the overarching waste strategy and then the finance that's put in to back that up. And I think what I raised originally was that those decisions that need taking at certain points, because for instance, some plastics, you may recover more from them going to the recycling and energy recovery facility than you do from making a new plastic container out of them. So for some of them, it's a case that we want to remove that plastic from the chain, thus not having to make 70% more plastic to make a tub out of it. It's actually better to recover it as energy in some instances, and that's why we've got the energy recovery facility. So that's one side in there. It's not necessarily that putting something in your green bin is the only way to recycle it. There's other ways we recycle in the city, and I think people probably don't know that there's next to nothing that goes to landfill. Because we do that, we recycle things that are non-recyclable in a way as energy. So that's one point just to bring in there, because I think that then makes it clearer how we see recycling.
Can I just comment on that point, Councillor Carly? I think that's a really good point. And one of the things I did when I looked at this paper was wonder if we could have invite an expert in terms of the climate impact of different recycling options. For example, glass versus cardboard versus plastic. And I think that would really help us interrogate what are the best uses of resources. So in terms of the climate emergency, which I think we all supported in full council declaring. So we need to understand what recycling options have that. So I'm hopeful the board will support that in terms of having an expert. I don't know if it'll be Polly Cook, an officer, or someone outside in terms of saying what's the climate impact on that. Sorry, Councillor Carlisle, I'll let you carry on now.
No, thank you. And that's valuable, because I mean, I've got the book, I'll have to try and remember the title. Something about bananas. I'll remember the title later, but it's got the carbon impact of everything. How bad are bananas, I think it's called. People can look it up after. But for instance, that tells you such interesting facts as a box of wine is better than buying wine by the bottle, because it takes more energy to create the glass and blow the glass than it does to recycle the box. But you know, little facts like that sometimes may seem counterintuitive, but we'll need to come in. Yeah, it depends whether you then drink the whole box in a whole evening and the impact. But a couple of other comments then quickly I had. One was around, we've got it listed, comparison of recycling services against authorities in West Yorkshire, which could be argued to be our most comparative, but actually it's probably the ones that are seen as the best and the front runners that we might want to compare against, whether they've got the highest recycling percentages or whether they're managing to do it at a much lower cost than ourselves. And I don't know how we identify who those are, the ones that we could really learn something from and share best practice. The last comment I just had comes in line with yours then, Chair, really. We've got listed representation from the recycling sector, but we've got, for instance, partners across the city like Zero Waste Leeds that help enhance how we reuse waste rather than recycle it, etc. And I think they'd be kind of people that'd be very useful to hear from. Things like how we get into the clothing bank idea of, well, let's not send it for recycling in the first place. And I think that kind of external body might be good to put that that challenge to us on whether these things need to be recycled in the first place.
Thank you. And I think if we were to get external speakers, it makes in my head, it makes sense to almost have a information gathering session. And when I look through those 4 points, I think the cost and viability, I think we could probably do with a speaker in terms of that. Contractual issues, possibly we could do a speaker, or more detailed report from John, depending on advice in terms of how we do it. I know we use a third party provider to do the sorting of our waste already. And again, on the RERF, again, I think we could probably do more information. I think the one where we probably can't do that much more is the government waste strategy, where we'll probably have to wait to an extent. But I think the more I think about it, the more I think actually having a information gathering exercise with some external speakers next time would be quite beneficial. I think those were comments more than questions for officers, so I'll move on if that's all right, Councillor Carlisle. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a small question actually on Appendix 2, and it's recycled material, if you look at it. And I'm puzzled at why it costs so much more to process brown bin waste than green bin waste. You can see it's almost the same tonnage, a little bit more in brown bin waste, but it costs us 637,533 to deal with green bin waste, but 913,275 to deal with brown bin waste. And I'm puzzled what's the difference. There must be some income from the waste eventually. And I quite like your point, Chair, regarding the economics of and a lot more information would be appreciated on it. But maybe a quick answer from John or Neil or Mohammed would be useful at this stage.
John, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the figures that you're referring to, Councillor. I think looking at the table, that's the cost of processing the material. So through the contracts to process them. I don't think that includes the staffing. So if you look above it in the table A, that gives
that's on page 59, just for members.
So that gives the total cost of collecting green bins at I can't quite read it, 9.2 million roughly. And the total cost of collecting brown bins at 4.1 million. So that's the overall cost of providing a green bin service is 9 million as opposed to 4 million for brown. The figures below are the actual non-staffing costs. So the cost of the actual contract. So with green bin waste, we get a degree of income there, which helps offset the cost of the sorting. Whereas with brown bin, it's haulage and processing costs. And that's why it appears more expensive, because that's the processing part of it that's netted down. But I'll double check all that, Chair, and if with finance colleagues, and if I've got any of that wrong, I'll let you know.
Thank you very much. And again, I guess it again feeds back to in terms of the climate emergency, how much impact do we get in reducing impact on the climate per pound we spend? And so if you think about our black bin waste, it all goes to the incinerator. So almost nothing goes to landfill, and it gets reused in the district heating scheme. And then the ash is used to build roads. And so there's a really strong process that we have. And the question then turns to, how does that compare with our other options? When you think about glass, for example, currently we used our bottle banks, and so how does that feed in from a climate perspective? And I think that's where we need some real intellectual rigor to our decision-making process. That's my take, and if the board's supportive, I think that's how we should move forwards. I'm seeing nods around the room, so I'm going to take that as affirmative. Which I guess means, in terms of moving this agenda item forwards, what I'll do is I'll talk with Rob and Councillor Anderson about the terms of reference, just to bottom out what is in our remit and what's going to be in Councillor Anderson's remit as per Councillor Firth's points. And then we'll arrange some external expert to come and speak to us as a board to inform our inquiry. I think that's a way forwards, which I'm seeing agreement. Do you want to speak, Councillor Anderson?
As to how it might be able to add value. I would say from the outset that I do think the current budget allocated to this area is not capable of delivering the service within the tight constraints that they've got. Because, okay, they've had growth of 10%, but even if you take it at normal growth now being 5% over what you would think, you do need more money to run the service. I do genuinely think you do need more money. Where you're going to come from, I don't know, but I'm just being honest. I do think that there is more money needed for the service. The other thing that I think we need to try and test out is the marginal costs of brown bin service for garden waste on its own, and what the marginal cost would be if food was brought in. Because my understanding is that the quality of the recycling output, whatever it is degraded as soon as you put food into it. So I think we need to look at what the marginal costs of that are, so that we understand that one. The other one, if I understand correctly, the RERF target for recycling has been reduced down now. It's quoted in here as 10%. I understood it was now down to, I think it is about 4 or 5%, because they're not going to be giving us as much of a penalty or clawback now because of the adjustment. If that's the case, can you look at the contractual, what the amount is? Because I am told that the amount that they have to recycle now has been reduced. Now, that's the information that's been given to me. And the other thing is, what happens if the government don't do it? What are we going to put in place so that we can start putting some of this. For example, we might need to fund an anaerobic digester. That's going to have to go through the planning system, etc., etc. So we need to look at how much that would cost to start that work now, so that we can hit the ground running. That's just as an example, and how we can do that. And that's basically, I mean, the rest of the things, yes, we're working well together, but I do think these are the things that you can add your expertise to, as to what's the best way of funding those things. I mean, we funded the RERF through getting money. What's the best way? You know, should there be a West Yorkshire facility for food waste? I don't know. You know, we need to look at what's the best place, you know, somewhere on the border, say around Morley, not Morley, we would want it, but you could be able to take Wakefield and Kirklees in at the same area. So you might get economies of scale. And I think if you can drive that forward as well, because the point of scrutiny is to think the unthinkable. That's what we should be doing, not necessarily going with what's the right thing to do. We need to think the unthinkable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Do you want to respond to that, Councillor Firth?
Yeah, perhaps I'll start and maybe John could add to it. No, I mean, we've got to be very sure that at the moment, given the financing resources, there isn't extra money. There is actually extra pressure on the services as a result of the pandemic, more people working from home, extra packaging, extra tonnages, and all that. But coupled with that, we haven't got, that goes to all local authorities, you know, we haven't got the extra fine. We've got to find that money too. But, you know, we got to look at it in the national context on what the government have actually done so far. They've kind of kicked the can down the road in terms of in 2019 publishing a strategy which will be finalized in 2023. So until we know what the national government strategy is, it's very difficult for us to kind of move forward. We already do actually. I mean, I completely agree with the boards, what you said, Chair, and Councillor Carlin and Councillor Anderson, is that we're going to look at the kind of the practical, the logistical, and the costs, you know, how we could do things differently, whether it's disposing stuff, whether it's collections or changing things around. But in terms of doing something extra, I mean, we already do, for instance, the garden waste collection. I can sit here and say in any forum, we've got the biggest and free garden service anywhere in the UK, not just in the region, anywhere in the UK. We've already got, you know, we're leading on things like, you know, recycling on the go, and other local authorities have actually taken that on board, and we're extending that into the district centres, albeit small, but these are very positive steps. We are already doing, you know, the small electrical items, the wee banks, and expanding those as well. We've got 700 bottle banks or glass banks across the city, and there's a lot goes on. And then everything we do in terms of curbside and all that, I think we got to look at the practical sides of it, whether people can have, you know, more bins at curbside. Councillor Anderson's right. You know, I think we need to explore, you know, the co-mingling, which is, you know, food going into the garden way, the brown bins and all that. That's something we need to, I think there are some examples, but that's something we need to look and explore. And obviously scrutiny input would be crucial into something like that.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. And I think your point there about the cost of the bottle banks is a classic example of where we need to look at the climate impact of putting bottles, say, in green bins. Obviously, it reduces your yield on cardboard, but what's the overall carbon impact? And then if that's a saving, you can get rid of the bottle banks and do it in the green bins. But if it's not a carbon saving, then we're going to have to carry on as we are, I guess. Okay, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just a quick one. Going back to the co-mingling, I think we could also look, whichever scrutiny board it is, at the impact of putting the wet waste in the black bins, because my understanding is that does have an impact in the incinerator, in as much as it takes longer or more energy to actually incinerate it if it's wet rather than dry.
Yeah. So that's saying when we look at it, have a holistic thought, not just the impact of co-mingling, but the co-mingling along with the taking it out of the
Yeah.
incinerator. Yep, I agree with that.
Yeah, might take cost out of collecting it, but if it's adding cost in at the recycling centre, then it's not necessary. And there are other impacts, environmental impacts of having the food waste kept separate as well, which might be beneficial. And just one other thing I was just going to say about the RERF, I agree. I think we need more information on the target, whether it's 10% or 5%. How is that determined? Because it sort of depends on how much is recycled in the green bins as to how much they would be able to recycle.
Yeah, I totally agree. We need more information. I don't know if you want to bring a report to a future meeting, John. He's nodding, so I think we'll have that if that's okay. Because if it's not, if you're just going off the hoof, we'll probably it probably won't be quite as useful in terms of conversation. Okay, is that okay, Councillor Chapman? Yeah, great. Okay, Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's just one further point I wanted to raise in relation to what Councillor Anderson, what Councillor Rafiq have mentioned, which should be something that we could look into a bit further, which is obviously I mentioned about private involvement. Obviously, a number of city centre businesses and others that have got individuals that are no longer working in the city centre use private contractors as well as also our public service, and actually looking into the detail of actually how that distribution has changed may be useful in terms of actually looking to the future about how the service needs to look. I know we can have a political battle over money and whatever, but the fact is that obviously as a scrutiny board we want to see where we're going to be in the future and obviously planning for that. And I think certainly looking at the picture of the city would certainly be helpful in terms of actually whether actually it is something that potentially it is an opening that we could potentially be looking into in the future as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Firth, and I'd agree with that point. I think that might well be helpful. Okay, I feel like this is almost like an opening to an inquiry meeting where we haven't quite got into the detail that perhaps I'd like to. And I'm sure you would like to, but I'm sure we'll have some interesting meetings going forwards. Again, I just think we need to be really careful on that in terms of reference and making sure we scrutinise what we are meant to be scrutinising and leave the Councillor Anderson's board to scrutinise the other items. So I think we'll move on. I can't see any other comments. But I'd like to thank Councillor Feek and John for coming today. Sorry you had to wait so long to speak. Clearly last item was very, very popular. And I look forward to seeing you at a future scrutiny board. So thank you very much. Okay, I can move on to agenda item 9, which is on page 63 of your packs. This is Victoria's come to present. Again, Victoria, you can assume we've read our papers, but if there's anything you want to highlight before we go into questions, feel free.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is covering 6 financial years. The medium-term financial strategy covers 5 financial years, and it's the second year that we've had a detailed medium-term financial strategy. It identifies the influences that affects the resources that the council actually receives and also the expenditure that we incur. The medium-term financial strategy shows that over the next 5 years, we've got a budget gap position of 146.5 million. And that we're focusing as a council on the next 3 years, which is actually 126.7 million. The biggest impacts for us is in 22-23 next financial year, and we have a savings requirement of 65.4 million. There is coming back to scrutiny in December where we'll look at that position and the proposals around how to reduce that budget gap, the budget deficit for the council. We're awaiting the comprehensive spending review that is due on the 27th of October. But obviously we won't get the detail for each local council until December. So that has a significant impact on how we will plan for the savings requirement over next year. There's a lot of information within the MTFS and it does detail a lot of the assumptions. I won't go into the detail of that because it is contained in the actual strategy. However, there is uncertainty around the 3-year settlement, the fair funding review, the business rates, the level that we can increase council tax by, the referendum limits, and what will be assumed by central government on social care funding. So there's some fundamental things there that we are still waiting for. But the main aim of the strategy is to make sure that the decisions that we are making are financially resilient and sustainable for the future. Just very quickly on the current financial year, we are at this position that was reported to Exec Board, forecasting a 400,000 overspend. However, that the majority of that is around COVID funding, which is actually 25 million, but we've received funding to mitigate that in the current year. But obviously we're very mindful of what will happen with around those pressures carrying on into future years. And that hasn't been built into that budget gap at the moment. We're still reviewing that and seeing how the economy recovers, the demand for services, etc. is impacted. I think those are the key points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Victoria. And I think your point around the uncertainty makes it very difficult for Councillor Cooper, the exec team, and yourself to plan, because we don't know the budget for next year yet, which is a real shame in terms of helping us plan. In terms of, I've just got a question to start with, which I just think would just help the board. So on page 100, sort of table 4.2.6, you can see that the net revenue budget increases year on year, but we're required to make in savings. I'm just wondering if you could just explain in lay terms why that is. I think it's one of the complications of local government budgets, which is worth spelling out for us as a board, but also the wider public listening.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to the page that you're referring to. But the budget is, we received in this current financial year, we received reliefs against the business rates, and those reliefs were received as specific grants, which nets off our net revenue position. So it shows that it's lower in the current year. However, as we move across to future years, those reliefs reduce, and we have to collect that through business rates, and that will then increase the actual position, but the amount of income that we get stays the same, but our costs of our services increase. So that's why we always have we've got a budget gap position. So the amount that we've received through income is just, it's shifted from general funding from specific, and that's the reason why.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to open up to members if you've got questions. It doesn't look like Councillor Anderson, bring you in first.
One of the things I've been asking for discussing, and this goes back to your predecessor, is zero-based costing, starting from scratch again, to find out, have you considered that? Or if you have considered, well, hopefully you've considered it. So why was that deemed not practical just to go to zero-based? So that's that one. The reserves policy, have you anything specifically you want to add, that we need to do more, that we need to address as a council in terms of our reserves policy? And the third one is, what's going to be the effect on our finances of trying to meet the 2030 target that we agreed as a council? We agreed as a council to go by 2030, but if the government don't get the funding, what effect is that going to have on us trying to go ahead and do a lot of these things in order to make the targets? What's the effect going to be?
Okay, thank you. So the first one on the zero-based budgeting, when we do the budget and set the position for the council, we do look at the services in a lot of detail. So from starting from a blank piece of paper, which is what zero-based budgeting is, we've always got around the delivery of those services. So we'll always have the staffing and the requirements around providing those budgets. So we do that in a way anyway every year, re-look at it, look at how we can make the services more efficient and effective. But to deliver a certain level of service, you've got those fixed costs in effect, and therefore we do look at each year the budgets in a lot of detail. So going back to a blank piece of paper wouldn't necessarily get to the savings that you would expect. I think on the level of balances, it's recognised in the medium-term financial strategy that we have been relatively low on the level of balances and reserves that we've had, but that was an informed decision that we've made over a number of years, and that nobody could have predicted the COVID impact that we've had, but we have recognised now as a council that perhaps we should have a higher level of balances and reserves than we currently got, but that is built into the medium-term financial strategy and detailed in a lot of detail in the background about why we would do that. There's also a report that I do to full council on the level of balances that I feel that's appropriate for the council based on the risk that's in the budget, and that is quite a detailed analysis of the risks in the budget and why we need to provide for those. It's not just saying it should be a certain percentage of net revenue budget. Just on the third one, on the 2030 target, I think that's around looking at the priorities for the council, and it's around all the spending decisions. We take that into consideration and then decide where to prioritise our resources. I don't know if Neil wants to come in and say a bit more on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just on that last point. So there is a piece of work by the Climate Commission on the amount of money which will be required by the city to actually invest by that period, and it runs into the billions. In terms of our own council position, it is what Victoria's saying. It's really around the prioritisation of our existing budgets, given we always have to work within that limit. But you can see quite significant shifts. So, for example, in housing, still some familiarity there. I mean, we've moved from a few percent to almost being about a quarter of the budget going into energy efficiency. So 120 million, I think, going into energy efficiency. I think you'll see the transport plan, which is going to the executive board this afternoon, a much greater proportion of the expenditure going through that. I think there are also, it's not always about just prioritization, though. It's actually sometimes thinking through good business cases. So we have now the largest electric van fleet in the country, and that's based on the fact that actually maintenance costs and fuel costs are so much lower. It's actually a cost-effective thing to do. We're also seeing very significant investment in our larger buildings and our schools in terms of energy efficiency, which again has got payback to it as well. So it's prioritization, but also sensible business cases, which are requiring us maybe to think about something paying back over 5, 10, 15 years, rather than what is the upfront cost, which is what traditionally the council tended to do. Thank you. Victoria, so I had a question on page 80. It's a table 1.1 and the paragraph 1.6.1. I was really struck by the fall in funding over the last sort of 11 years, I guess. I was wondering if you could do it. I'm assuming it is not real terms, it's pound amounts rather than a real graph. That's the initial question. Yes, it is. And I guess I'm wondering if you could provide a graph that included sort of allowed for inflation, and I guess the other two factors which it doesn't include is extra responsibilities that's been required by the council, for example, some of the public health stuff, which is an increased pressure, and I guess also much more, I guess it'd be more difficult to provide anything around extra pressures, for example, in adult healthcare. I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, we could have a look at that, but what happens is that we might get additional funding to do an initiative, but then it gets rolled into the settlement, and then we lose the track of that funding. So it is quite difficult to do. But I'll have a look at it and see what we can achieve around that, and to bring in the cost of inflation. But we would need to do that CPI in September, which is the normal measure that we use.
Yeah, CPI would be appropriate, the government's choice of inflation measure, isn't it? So yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then I also on on the ELI, the Early Leavers Initiative Scheme, have we got any analysis on the overall savings, including allowance for sort of pension costs, etc., that's sort of made?
We will have that. I'll bring that back to a future meeting.
Okay, maybe if you can write to Rob,
yeah,
and circulate it to the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, are there any other questions? Yep, Councillor McKenna.
Just a very quick one, Victoria. The huge increases in energy costs, 300-400%. Have we evaluated what effect that will have on the proposed budgets?
Thank you, Chair. We are looking at the moment. The budget does actually assume at the moment a 5% increase in energy costs, but we are doing substantial work on what the actual forecast will be. Obviously, it's in the national press around energy costs increasing quite significantly, so that could be an additional pressure for us. But we are doing further work on that at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't see any other members indicating, so thank you very much, Victoria. It's really thorough report, which is really helpful. And we'll move on. Thanks for your time. Okay, thanks. Okay, I think we're got Tim here for the next item. Just if you assume we've read the report and highlight anything, I'm keen just to also for you to highlight if there's how sort of the overall risk that not the corporate stuff is managed. So I think as a council, as a scrutiny board, we're looking at the corporates, but we should also make sure corporately we have a strategy for managing all the sort of directorate risks as well. So if you just comment on that as well, please, Tim, when you go through.
Good afternoon, Tim Rollett from Intelligence and Policy Service. So this is the annual risk report. The report focuses on the strategic risks facing the council. Those are the big things that, if they did happen, would seriously affect our ability to meet the best council plan. But as Councillor Scopes mentioned, the corporate risk register is underpinned by risks at directorate level. Each directorate has its own specific risk register. And there's also service level risks, and those are things like those for programmes and major projects. So this isn't, the corporate risk register isn't the be all and end all, it sits at the top of a pyramid of risks. The corporate and directorate risks are reviewed and updated 4 times per year. Those risks go through the respective directorate management team, onto corporate leadership team, and then onto executive board in the annual report. And this year's annual report went to the board in July. It's also worth mentioning that this year we updated the risk management policy and strategy, which is our framework for managing risks. And within that, we included clear details about how to escalate risks from service level to directorate level, then up to corporate if needs be. And that policy and strategy were endorsed by executive board back in July. When I attended the board, I made an offer for risk management refresher training to board members, should any people require it. And that offer is also extended to members of this board. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you've got on our corporate risks and also those directorate and service level.
Thank you very much, Tim. I can't see members commenting, so I'll ask my question first. So just on page 187, do you have a question? Councillor Hamilton first, so I didn't see you there.
Mine might be a silly question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. With regards to what are the resources implication, and my question is what is in place if it does? So I'm talking about point number 8 on page 181. Should any of the corporate risk included in this report arise, there would be significant resources implication for the council. So what is in place to address if they do arise? And then might be, so that's that one. And this number 5 on 180, I just ask the question why.
Right, I'll answer the first question, and that was a good question to ask. What would happen if these risks arose? And obviously, it depends on the nature of the risk as to what the implication would be on the resources, whether it be a financial hit or a hit around staffing. So, for example, with the coronavirus risk, it impacted on both. There's also reputational impact as well, so how citizens and communities perceive the council and how we respond to risks. So the emphasis there really is in how we prevent the risks from happening in the first place. And so each of the risks, there's a series of existing controls in place to either manage that risk, to stop it from happening, or to deal with the risk should it occur. And for the big risks in this report, each of those risks has got an assurance report that outlines high level, what those controls in place are. But we appreciate the situation keeps moving quite rapidly, and we can't sit on our laurels, and we've always got work to do in managing these risks. And so each of the risks has a series of actions that we need to do to carry on managing that risk, whether it's regular reporting or staff training. So through a combination of anticipating what could happen, putting resources into those controls and having plans in place to deal with the risks, that helps limit the impact on resources there. In terms of the second question.
Number 5, just regarding the impact.
Right, let me just find the right place in the report.
Page 180, number 5. It says this is an assurance report with no decision required. So it's not necessary to conduct an equality impact assessment. So, my question is why? I know it says however, but I'm still asking why.
Yeah. When we updated the risk management policy and strategy, we did a quality impact assessment for that, which kind of looked at what the implications of changing the strategy would have been. In terms of this report, it is for information, but however, should any of the risks arise, it could impact across the city and its communities. So the fact that we've got the report there and it outlines what we're doing to mitigate the risks, hopefully minimises the impact across the city.
Would you be able to share the initial equality impact assessment with the board?
That's right. We did the impact assessment for the strategy and the policy. I can share that with the board and send that on to Rob.
I think that makes sense. Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah.
So we can see what thought has gone through. Yeah. No, I understand. So let's see what assessment was made when it was updated. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just think it's worth noting, I do think that it's a disappointment. I appreciate there are other meetings on, but that senior colleagues weren't able to stay at the meeting, and maybe that's something for scheduling. And that's not to make a point. It's just simply the fact of having them here, as we are a scrutiny board and we will want it on any issue that comes up. One thing I wanted to mention, obviously in November last year, it was reported in the press, and also we know through various different reports that Grant Thornton placed that our council unfortunately was ill prepared to tackle the monster that is COVID. And obviously, given that we have one of the lowest general fund reserves of the core cities, should our budgetary risks be placed even higher, at very high risk, rather than where they are currently placed?
Yes, and again, I'm happy to answer that question. When the report went to Executive Board in July, it was the snapshot of the risks at the year end back in April. And since then, we've obviously regularly reviewed and updated the risks. And certainly the medium-term finance risk that you can see on that corporate register has increased since then, largely due to the reasons that Victoria has outlined. Also, you'll notice that the in-year budget risk in this report is actually rated as medium. And obviously, when you set the budget at the start of the year, you set a balanced budget, but we're aware of a pattern where every single year the budget risk increases during the year due to these various overspends and unforeseen circumstances. And then as the finance services tie the risk up at the end of the year, that's when it starts to decrease as they work their way through how to deal with the overspend. So when the risks are next updated next month, it's quite likely that that risk on in-year budget will have increased due to the reasons that have been outlined in the previous report.
So are you saying the medium-term financial position has moved from where it is? So where is it at the moment?
That's right. So when we went to corporate leadership team in August, that risk increased. And if I just bring up the risk register from August, medium-term budget is now rated in the red zone with probability of 3, impact of 5. And again, that's largely down to the reasons that were outlined in the previous report on finances. So this is the nature of the risks, that they're changing all the time. And because we review them and update them regularly, it's a moving feast.
Thank you. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. The reason I mentioned that point earlier about colleagues not being here is not a political point. It's just simply the fact that my follow-up was to ask about the COVID reserve as well. Because of the simple fact that we don't obviously know what's going to be coming ahead of us. We would strongly hope that the government does not need to take the stringent actions it had to take before. But certainly in relation to whether that was adequate in terms of the situation in preparing for what was to come. Obviously, I appreciate that it also includes around about £600,000, including 520 for free school meals. But that was just the general point, was actually looking at and assessing whether actually we are properly prepared should there be any further problems in the future. I wanted to explore that in more detail. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. I think, Tim, do you want to respond to that, or is that not really?
I think that's something we can pick up with Victoria, because she'll have the answers to that question, because it was about the reserve, wasn't it? And again, the COVID risk that we have on our corporate risk register incorporates financial aspects of it as well. So that will get picked up as part of that. And again, those risks are due to be updated next month. But I can get a response from Victoria for you on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's worth noting that I don't think any council was really ready for COVID, neither any country, as much as it should be as a nation. My comment is just, again, on that page, I think my personal view is climate change risk should be probable, not possible. Sadly, I think it's happening around us, and we can see it around the world, rather than it might happen in the future. But that's a comment more than a question for future updates. Okay. Other questions? No. Okay. So let's move on to the work programme. So the first point, I'm just picking up on what Councillor Firth was just talking about in terms of attendance. So my understanding is there's a cabinet meeting at 1. I guess one option for us would be to start earlier. I don't know what members think about that, or I'm reluctant to reduce our items, because I feel like we've got a lot of important work to do as a scrutiny board. So I'll start with that as a suggestion, but also open to ideas for future topics. Okay, bring in Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it was further to the point that I was raising. It's understandable. We had a very robust discussion about culture and other matters, but I think that certainly, I think it's just maybe we need to look at how our board maybe needs further time to assess those, because there are such pressures that we are facing as a council, that our remit as a board is certainly grown over the past 18 months in terms of actually the amount of scrutiny that we need to place on that. And I think that certainly the only concern with moving that time forward is obviously the commitments that other members of the board may have, family commitments or otherwise, but it is for general discussion. But I do think that certainly, given that we only have a certain number of meetings a year, that really we are holding a public meeting rather than a private meeting in the cabinet. And therefore, as a result, potentially, I'm not making a point about colleagues have had to leave. I understand that. But the fact is that in the future, if we can schedule it so that we can have them for the rest of the meeting, that would be appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rob, do you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I could perhaps do some background work just to check when our meeting clashes with Cabinet as a start for 10. And if that is the case, then I could put a proposal round via you, Chair, that that suggested a different start time potentially. I'm not sure it'll be every month, so it might be worth just me checking that. Yeah, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I think that the point around the culture item probably took longer than we expected. I think we had a really valuable debate actually, and we do need to put the pressure and the challenge. That's our job. Okay, Councillor McKenna.
Just following up on Sam's point, I'd be happy for us to start at 10 o'clock. A lot of scrutiny boards do, and in fact, this used to meet at 10 o'clock. It could be that we don't need a half an hour for a pre-meeting. Maybe you could look at a chair and suggest 10, 15 minutes beforehand. But what I noticed that when we had mentioned it on the cultural item, that it would come back to us in December. And given what Sam says, I know there's no meeting in September, and maybe there should be a meeting in December. I wouldn't fancy having it on Christmas Eve, which would be the designated day, but I wouldn't mind us having one the week before that. You know, if we're that busy, then I think we should look at again December and perhaps suggest a date. And I'm sorry for members, we've all got busy diaries, including myself, but we have a job to do, haven't we?
Sir Hamilton.
Just say, Chair, I agree with Councillor McKenna. You know, we've got the culture coming back and we've asked for other things. So if we could schedule one in December, then the agenda won't be so heavy sometime, because depends what come up, you know, obviously the 2023 took a lot, which we need, you know. So if we could, even if it's just 1 or 2 items in December, it don't have to be a full long meeting. And also I agree, if we could start at 10 o'clock and just like meet a quarter to for 15 minutes instead of that half an hour, because we wasted 20 minutes this morning, you know, pre-meeting. So 15 minutes pre-meeting, you know, obviously sometime we might say 15 minutes, sometimes we got a lot more to ask or say, but if we schedule it for 15 minutes and then stop when it comes to pre-meeting, shut him up.
Thank you for comments. I'll take those away and check. We have got a private members meeting in December about the budget, which again will come to a public meeting in December. But I'll look at that with Rob. Councillor Firth, do you want to comment again?
Thank you very much, Chair. And further to that, I just wanted to ask, could you establish, Rob, as the clerk or otherwise, how we're going to progress with the environmental scrutiny that we've just talked about in relation to waste strategy and how that's going to go forward?
Yeah, so I'll ask Rob to circulate something later. But it is in the agenda for November if you look at the work plan, but we do need to work that out. And I think to an extent there might be a little bit of a movable feast depending on where we get to. So, for example, I imagine we'll look at a report from John Woolmer on the RERF. I can imagine a scenario where we want further information after that report and him to come back again. I feel like that's a very realistic scenario, but I don't know for sure. So I think putting it all in now when we don't know, but there's definitely space for that. And I also think if we have an information gathering exercise in November, like we've discussed, I can't imagine that won't generate future work as well. So.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry to come in with another question. The other thing that we did know, I think, well, look, it's about I've used that word a lot today, robust scrutiny. And the next question was going to be, obviously today, I'm sure colleagues noticed there was unfortunately a number of instances where colleagues in relation to the culture item didn't have specific information available at the time, which is concerning, but understandable given the circumstances. But really, we should have more information when it comes to a scrutiny board hearing. Is that something that certainly we can make sure that information, basically, how are we going to get that information, do you think, making sure that we can get that in the future and ensure that we don't have a meeting whereby we're asking serious questions and we don't have gaps in the information provided. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Rob, do you want to comment on that?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I mean, really, it's a process. It's in the drafting process, isn't it? So the perhaps needs to be a little bit more in focus on that, how they're drafting it, and then to the Chair's brief, perhaps we could seek to address any issues like Councillor Firth referred to. I think there'll always be, to some extent, a requirement for me to go chasing report authors to provide additional information, but I do take the point there, Councillor Firth. Yeah.
Could they come back in?
Yes, so I think there's a balance. I think so. Myself and Rob need to do more at challenging the initial reports, but I think there is a point around getting the right information, and so to an extent we find out what information we need in this, and so inviting them back. So bringing back, for example, 2023 is now clearly something I think we should do, whereas 4 hours ago I might not have thought it was definitely needed. Sharon, do you want to come back?
Yes, with regards to 2023, I mean, obviously they didn't have answers to quite a few things. They are working on it. And I was just suggesting that maybe they come back in February with all the answers. We need to give them time because, you know, they're under pressure now anyway, because 2023 will be here within a blink.
It will be, Councillor Firth.
Well, I think I want to reiterate that it will be here in a blink. And the only worry I've got is that February might be a little bit too late. That's the only concern. And the only reason I say that is because of the fact that, for example, when I asked specific questions about the 23 projects that were commissioned, the 6 schools that were involved, that information was not even in the report. It wasn't even known to the staff. I appreciate they've got a big remit. I appreciate that. But that information wasn't readily available. And also the other question was, I was concerned about the data they used. Fantastic to hear that people want to engage in 2023 as a year. But I was concerned that there wasn't much information. I should have actually asked it about what that survey actually was, how many people were actually interviewed, and actually look into more detail. And I think certainly it's something that I think they have realised, and hopefully when they come back again, they will provide further information. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I take your point about having a plan with sufficient time to implement before 1 January 2023, and I think that is the challenge, and there's real challenge in that. Councillor Chapman and then Councillor Carlisle.
I was just going to say I agree. I mean, if we leave it well February and there's still questions that we haven't had answered, they're very close to their 100-day deadline in September. You know, there's not that many months. We don't sit in April and May, do we? So it's not a lot of time after February. I just think December might be a better idea in case we have got more questions that need to be looked at. We might need to do February as well, but if we leave it 1 February, then it's going to be June before we get anywhere, and it's very close to September's deadline for launching what we're going to do.
Councillor Carlisle. Is that, I didn't catch that, but if they have, we might well have a, yeah, well, we might have a one item agenda meeting, which will only go on for 3 hours. Go on, Councillor Carlisle.
I was just going to come back. Now, I can't remember if it's this board or the previous board I used to sit on, but we did have quite a discussion about, I think, some of those figures that were there. So it might be worth looking at what's been scrutinised before, because I know obviously you're new to the board this year. I can't remember if it was this one or inclusive growth.
I was going to say, is it inclusive?
Yeah,
No, I don't know.
Inclusive growth, who scrutinised, I think, the remit and the reason for 2023 and what it's there to do. But I certainly remember looking at that in depth with now Baroness Blake and Clooney McPherson as service leader at the time. So it depends where we are and what's been answered previously.
Councillor Firth and then Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think there's just a general point. I think there was a discussion raised at the last meeting. I can't remember on which topic. I think it was to do with the elections or another matter, that there was a major issue that also we didn't have that information. I appreciate that also the fact that the remit of this meeting is we're doing so much at the moment, and I'm therefore not putting pressure on either the Chair or the Clerk. But what I am saying is that I think that certainly the robustness of the information that comes back. I'm using that word a lot. The amount of information that individuals are able to come to this board with is a little bit concerning for the future, and I hope we can improve that in some way.
No, I was going to say, I didn't think we'd scrutinised it. I've been on this committee. Well, you've been on Simpson. I don't remember us scrutinising culture before.
It's definitely, so culture is definitely in our portfolio to scrutinise.
I don't remember a detail on it.
And I think, and I think it's changed the sort of who scrutinises it, and the real reality is if they've done it before and been asked the questions, they should have had the answers. And that sounds harsh. It doesn't mean to be harsh. It's just factual. So let's just carry on with what our responsibility is as a board, and it is in our remit, and therefore it is our job to scrutinise that decision. Councillor Firth, do you want to comment again?
I'm sorry to come in again, but I just would. Well, I'm trying to hit 1:30, you see. No, I'm joking. The other question was to ask whether I raised it at last minute meeting. Sorry, whether devolution could be put on the agenda at some point. And I appreciate we are still very early into having a mayoral authority, but certainly to look at where we are, especially in a few months in, certainly is where I would like to go from there. Thank you, Chair.
Rob, can you comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Yes, that's in my notes. It's one to take forward. We have got, well, I say this now, we did have space towards the February, March time of the year. So I was thinking for then, but obviously I'd be guided by members' views on that. I mean, also the longer you leave it, the more time you have for the mayoral to be in place. But yeah, so I'd take feedback on that.
With regards to the mayor, we need to book her well in advance because she's supposed to come to something. It's been cancelled, and she's also due at another meeting I'm attending. So let's hope she don't cancel that either. So we need to make sure we book her now.
Yeah, I take those comments, and I think you're right. We do need to book her. If we wanted to come, we can put her as agenda item 1, so she only needs to sit in and those comments. Councillor Firth.
I appreciate that a number of these minutes. The pre-meeting might have lasted much longer had I been available to go through these details. There is one final point, which is the fact that when we initially assessed whether the plan for the West Yorkshire Mayor as a board, and there was a wider inquiry that was chaired by Councillor Harland, I believe, would it be incumbent on us to invite the chairs of the individual committees that were also involved in that discussion to also be part of the scrutiny in relation to devolution, should that take place, and the mayor then join us?
I'd take that away and talk to Councillor Harland in particular, and Rob. I think that certainly we should have the minutes of those meetings available to us when we have those discussions, so we can review what was said previously. Okay, so I think we're at the end of our meeting. Good, says Councillor McKenna. Good. So thank you very much for everyone's input today. Sorry it's been a long meeting. I feel like it needed to be today, and I'll go away with Rob and talk about whether we need an extra meeting in December, in addition to the one about the finances. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.